Awesome. All right. Okay, so we are going to be talking about networked women's hockey equivalency, which is what N-WHKYe stands for, which is basically just a metric to evaluate offensive production of women's hockey players all across the world. There's a ton of women's hockey leagues in the world, but there's not really one sort of standard metric that we can use to compare all of them. So that's what we've aimed to do with this project. So just a little bit about us. I'm Holly, right for the Ice Garden. Mikael, a scout, very smart. John, also very smart. And just these are our Twitters where you can reach us. That's basically it. So now we'll just get into explaining, why we wanted to do this. So basically the project sort of centers around one sort of key simple question, and that's just what's a point worth in women's hockey? We kind of, as writers and analysts, make assumptions about what points are worth. We sort of know that scoring a goal in Division I NCAA is probably harder than scoring a goal in Division III. Sometimes it's not so clear cut though. What about, the Australian League? What about the SJHL? So sort of writing about the N-WHL draft and free agent signings this season, one thing became sort of clear that there's not really one way to evaluate offensive performance across league. There's not really a great way to compare things. So what this project aims to do in sort of simplest terms is to show exactly what a point is worth in any given league. And basically, so there are two sort of ways that I'm going to explain how this is going to be useful. To teams, it's going to be useful for scouting and evaluation and development. In terms of scouting and evaluation, just sort of asking yourselves, is it better to spend our draft pick on this player from U Sports or this player from Division III? You can sort of look at the equivalency and figure that out. In terms of development, you can sort of ask yourself, why isn't this player, putting up the points that they did last season? And you can kind of look at the equivalency and see that there's sort of a discrepancy there. In terms of media, like I mentioned, it's going to make making comparisons and sort of predictions so much easier for draft coverage and free agency. And of course, it's going to let us make those, top 10 articles that we all love to write. It gives us another tool to have that who's the best women's hockey player argument. And so I'm just going to do sort of a little bit of a comparison to just sort of explain how the weights work here. So we're just going to sort of look at two players. We have Marie-Philippe Poulin, her 2018-19 season with Les Canadiens. 26 games played, 50 points, 1.92 points per game. We also have Michelle Carvinen, SDHL, same season, same amount of games, 56 points and 2.15 points per games. Looking at this, you would probably sort of just say, just looking at these raw numbers, Michelle Carvinen had the better season, same amount of games played, higher points per game. But if you sort of look at the way that the equivalency is weighted, you can sort of see that a goal or a point in the CWHL was weighted more heavily than a goal in the SGHL. So what you can sort of gather from that is that offensively, Marie-Philippe Poulin's production was more impressive. And then so what is it? It's just a metric that allows you to standardize offensive production across more than 40 women's hockey leagues across the world. Sort of Mikael has included in the model 44 leagues that sort of span from 2010 to 2019. So, all the way from the CWHL to the Spanish Women's Hockey League, high school hockey, just all kinds of it. So now just to sort of explain, the math and how this all works, Mikael will talk about the model.
Thank you. So basically talking about the model, the first step in order to build the model is to select the target league, or in our case, the target leagues. This is going to be the benchmark that we're going to use to compare all the other leagues across the world. So in CJ Turturro's N-WHKYe model, which is the main source of inspiration for our project, the target league was the NHL. That's actually pretty convenient because in the NHL, you have a bunch of players that have been developed from leagues all across the world that come in to compete against the best of the best in this specific league. Then basically in women's hockey, unfortunately, we don't really have such a league. So what happens is that to fix this issue, we had to use the international leagues in the following divisions and following age groups in order to build our model and use them as target leagues. So now that we've introduced the target leagues, let's talk a bit about how the model actually works. The model uses a network approach like CJ Turturro's model. And to introduce this network approach, we're going to take the example of two Swiss leagues, Swiss Division A and Swiss Division B. Obviously, between those two leagues in the same season, what's going to happen is that you're going to have some players that are going to be called up or that are going to be sent down, depending on the different roster needs of the organizations in those two leagues. And so what we did in terms of stats here is that we summed up the total stats in terms of games played and points for the players in the situation that we described, having played in both those leagues in the same given year. So with those stats, what we can do is actually use the points per games played ratio to link those two leagues together, going from A to B, which gives us a ratio of around 2.36, or going the opposite route, which gives us a ratio of around 0.42. What this actually means in terms of the ratios is that a player who puts up 1 point per game in the Swiss Division A would approximately average 2.36 points per game in the Division B. Moving on to the introduction of paths. So now that we have the networks, let's see how we can use those networks to build robust mathematical paths that will help us estimate the value for the 44 leagues that we have. And so basically, again, we'll take the example of another league this time, actually, of Division 1 in Sweden. It's a bit counterintuitive because Division 1 is actually the second best Swedish women's hockey league. But the goal here is going to be to build paths that start at the Division 1 league and arrive at our target league. The simplest way to link those two leagues is the direct path, which gives us a ratio of around 0.07, which we will call the women's hockey of path 1. Then to try to simulate the development path that another player might take, we can actually add a third league into the mix, this time looking at the SDHL. The SDHL is basically the strongest women's hockey league in Sweden, and we can build a network going from Division 1 through the SDHL and arriving at the Women's World Championship. By multiplying the ratios on this path, we get a women's hockey of around 0.08 for path 2. We could actually stop here, but in order to go one step further and make our model even more robust, we can add a fourth league into the mix to try to simulate another development path that a player might take. In this case, we add the U18 regional tournament that used to take place a couple of years ago in Sweden. And basically, we build a model that starts with Division 1, goes through the U18 regional tournament, through the SDHL, and arrives at our target league. The women's hockey of this path is obtained by basically multiplying the three ratios, which gives us, again, a women's hockey of around 0.07 for path 3. Now that we have the women's hockeys for paths 1, 2, and 3, we can take an average of these and get the value, which we call the N-WHKYe for Division 1, which is around 0.07. The important thing to actually keep in mind with the model is that these are hypothetical and mathematical paths. And there's no one player who's going to go through all of these paths in a given year, or maybe even throughout her career. So moving on to the actual formula of the model, we won't go into too much detail, but basically we use the weighting approach to give more importance to the paths that were stronger and less importance to the paths that were weaker. If you have any questions about the formula or the weighting approach that we used, we would be happy to address them during the Q&A.
So now to the dashboards to give a little bit more user-friendly ability for people to go in, look at this equivalency model, take the 21,000 players that we scraped over those 10 seasons that we included in the model and see what the kind of inputs came back as. So starting this Tableau dashboard is on my Tableau public, which we'll drop a link into the chat in a little bit. And we'll start off on the home page, get a little bit how-to, some hints on some hidden stuff, filters, items that really aren't readily viewed on the dashboard, a little bit of a summary, our contact info, a little bit of our bios that we have over on the right-hand side, and then the selectors for each of the 6 dashboards that we have. So starting on the home page, we're going to go to the rankings by year of each league and how their equivalency model ended up being. So as we start with the league, I'm going to set the limit of our rankings to 10. So to see the top 10 leagues, we're going to start in 2009, 2010. As we can see, NCAA, CWHL, SDHL, and PWHL were our top 4 leagues at that point. If we were to add all 44 teams in, we can see that there was only about 17 teams at that point. Going back to 10 just to make it a little bit more user-friendly and visual. We're going to look through and how those changed each year. We can see that from 2009 to 2014, the top 4 leagues, or really top 5, end up being that NCAA, CWHL, U Sports, and SDHL leagues. This is right before the N-WHKYE joined, so those really are top 4 for League Ws. As you scroll over each point, you can see the League W on the tooltip for what it's at, with the NCAA being the highest at 0.47. As we see the N-WHL pop into our picture, we see that it started as the 3rd best league on initial, and then ended up being the 2nd best by 16-17. And we look at the end of our model's years, we can see that it ended up being a top 2 league with CWHL, N-WHL, NCAA, and SDHL, and Russia being our top 5 leagues in 2018-19. We can also see the path it went through. So for Russia, it dipped all the way down to the 8th best league for League W, and became all the way back to the top 5. So now that we've looked at this ranking and how leagues have changed throughout, we can look at the top scorers and their greatest seasons by the country that the league is in. So now looking at the map, we can see highlighted the countries that have women's hockey leagues. I think it's about 15 to 20 of them. And we can see what leagues are in each country. So we can look at Canada, see that the number of leagues that they have inside Canada for women's hockey is 6. The leagues are listed below for player data that we have. As you can see, we have 6 in the total number of leagues, but only 5 leagues available. That's because the QCHL Women's League did not have any data come out by the time we were putting into the model. You can also see that for the United States, as we have 4 leagues. The one league that's not in here is NCAA Division III for player data. But as we click Canada, we can see the top scorers seasons by the equivalency model, and the players' names, the teams are in the season, and then the leagues that, the icons of the leagues that are in that country. So we can see that really a lot of the WHL top seasons has been dominated by the CWHL, with Megan Augusta and Mary Philippe Boulin in their 11, 12, and 15, 16 seasons respectively being the top 2. But then you can also see Melody Doe season in U Sports, where she had ended up with a 0.88 equivalency rating, was so well done, even in a low League W, that it vaulted her into the top 20. This definitely checks out with the performance that she actually had during that season, because she scored half of McGill's goals. We're going to now jump over to look a little bit by positions, career, average equivalency models, to kind of allow us to filter down and maybe find our favorite players. So now that we look at the league, we can see the positions across the top. There are the 6 categories being left wing, left defense, center, right defense, right wing, and all. And clicking the top will filter down the table below to give you only those people that are eligible to play in that position. If a forward, if a player has been given in the position forward, they're in both the left wing, center, and right wing categories. If they have defense, they're in both the left defense and right defense categories. And if they're a forward / defense, they get slotted into all 5 categories. So just allowing availability of players, even if the position is not fully defined. So as we can see for the center depth, Jocelyn Lamoureux's career totals of 109 games played, 97 goals, and the average season equivalency model of about 1.09. That's what it averaged up being. And then we can see Megan Augusta, Mary Fupelin, and Amanda Kessel rounding out that top 4. So again, you can use the filters across the top to only have left-handed, right-handed shooters. There also is the nulls for players that were not given a shooting hand in the data set. Leagues that they're in to filter those down. Teams that they're on. The nations that they come from. The seasons. So if you want to look at just players from the 18-19 season, you can look at that. And also filter by the birth year of that player. So now that we've kind of looked and we found kind of our favorite players, we can go into their individual player card, like the back of a baseball card, and kind of get their full stats. So looking, I chose the example of Haley Skrupa, being that I'm from DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia metro area, her being from the same place. So I chose her as the example. We can see her career from 2018 all the way to 2019, where she started out in the JWHL for the first 2 seasons, then going to Boston College, eventually ending up in the Connecticut Whale, Boston Pride, and Boston Pride for her last 3 years. If you scroll over the league icons in the top left, you can see what league she was in and the year she was in those leagues, with those being filtered down. So we can see how she was in JWHL for 2 seasons, NCAA for 4 seasons, and 3 seasons in the NWHL. So to filter down for your favorite player, you can go to the filter across the top, which is usually hidden in the top. So you would just click the filter icon. Clicking this filter allows you to then go search for it. So if we were to then select Hillary Knight, we can see her player card. So now we've kind of found our favorite players, looked through the different stats. We can now go jump into our creative team and create our dream starting 5 lineup. So the same way that the players by position was given, if the players are forward, they're available for the left wing, center, and right wing spots. If they're listed as defense, they're available for the left defense and right defense spots. So selecting the filters across the top, you can create your top 5, your dream lineup, or if we get to the chance during the World Championships, you can search and we'll add filters in for nations, for nationality, for seasons, for teams. So that way you can create your dream 5 as we get to these tournaments, and a little bit of interactiveness of the dashboard kind of outside of it. So I started with Haley Skrupa, Hillary Knight on the wings, Jocelyn Lamoureux in the center, with Monique Lamoureux and Casey Bellamy as the defense. So that is all for the dashboard. And I'm going to jump back. So again, if you're, the link will send out in the chat. You can select your top 5. Again, share it with hashtag WHKYHAC and show us your top 5. Any questions if we even have time? I don't know how we're doing on time.
Yeah, so one, I would like to start off, because I've already said it everywhere else, so why not just embarrass myself here, but I would like to legally propose marriage to this presentation. I hope you would accept it. Secondly, there was a couple of questions, and at this point, I think, yeah, we've just accepted we're going overtime, but everyone seems fine with that, so that's okay. Let me find the question in amongst everyone just screaming. Does this model implicitly take into account the quality of play in leagues years to year, or is that something that would need to be added in the future? I imagine this is like specifically looking at ones like the N-WHKYe, where we do see that dip in like centralization years.
Yeah, so basically what we did to build the model is that we used a smoothing approach by taking data from 3 years to build a model for a given year. So we would take 50% of our data from the year in question, and then 25% of the data from the year before and 25% from the year after, which gives us a good smoothing of like sort of a moving average of the league values and helps us evaluate the level of play in that specific league.
I'll give you a second. I'm just trying to see if there were. I'm trying to scroll the thread and find any questions. I'm sure there actually are, but I simply cannot find them. So I'm going to let you scroll. The absolute mess that is everyone losing their minds. Though I do believe the link needs to be dropped promptly, as chat is rioting at me, and I would prefer not to have my stream burned to the ground because they all want the dashboards now.